Welcome to the Southern Report. As you can see, I have safely parachuted in. I know that my guest has safely parachuted in, and it's an utter privilege to have your time and to be here. There are those moments when you have the wonderful, wonderful privilege of then being able to interview one of your own stock, one of your own countrymen, and someone who is then very much on the same page. And I am now privileged to do that. So I'm just going to bring on my friend Daniel Jupp, and we are going to discuss his latest book. We're going to discuss his views of the state of the UK, and we can go over his books, his other two books, and take it in any direction that Daniel wishes to. Daniel, great to see you, my friend, and thank you very much for parachuting in safely. It's always a concern.
Yeah, I'm not physically fit really, so the parachute bit was a bit of a surprise. But no, it's lovely to be here, and thanks for having me.
No, not at all. Daniel, could you please tell us straight from the get-go, and I need to remember to do this at the end, where we can find your work, where we can find your Substack, where we can find your other articles, because I want to just point out that to me, you are growing into this incredible sage that gives us such insight into what's going on here, and also at times such a good laugh. And I'm very, very grateful for your mind and how you bring all that together.
Yeah, the sage bit is probably my Buddha-like belly, but yeah, I thank you very much. That's very kind of you. But all of my work can be accessed. Most of it that I'm putting out in article form is on my Substack. So that's called Jupplandia, and if you go on Substack and enter in Jupplandia, you'll find that. I also regularly post on Facebook, so anyone who wants to Facebook friend me on there, they can find me at Daniel Jupp. Is obviously my name that I use on Facebook. I also publish in Country Squire magazine and The Conservative Woman. They're probably the publications that are most likely to kind of copy and repeat my articles elsewhere. My books are available from Bombadier. That's a US publisher, so you can go direct to them. Otherwise, I know a lot of people want to avoid using Amazon, so go direct to Bombadier if you want to, get it straight away. But if you're prepared to use Amazon, all my books are on Amazon still. So, that's US Amazon and UK Amazon. If you just enter the titles, you should be able to find them.
Daniel, thank you. So let's just quickly mention your first book where you were talking about cultural Marxism, and then we'll get into your second book because your third book flows from there. So if you could speak about your first book.
Yeah, my first book's called A Gift for Treason, The Cultural Marxist Assault on Western Civilization. And it's a bit of a long-winded title, but I still think personally that it's the most comprehensive account of the historical background of what we're facing, because I go over 2,500 years of Western history in that book, and I define what Western civilization is, which a lot of people don't do. They will talk in favor of Western civilization or against Western civilization, and they don't go to the effort of actually defining what that is. So that book does that, and it also explains what cultural Marxism is. So cultural Marxism is a historical cultural viewpoint, which was essentially pressed by the KGB and by the Soviets as a kind of tactic of demoralization of the West, taken up by kind of radical leftist figures in the West, promoted by Western academics. And cultural Marxism essentially sees Western civilization as inherently evil and flawed, and as primarily responsible for the ills that exist in the world, and that we should take it as our task to decolonize, as they put it in literature, and the curriculum, which means removing traditional white teaching and traditional white authors in particular. Dead white males are the people they're targeting with this. Because they have the idea, the cultural Marxist idea, that all of Western civilization is essentially built on slavery, exploitation, and evil. So, and that's the kind of standard academic attitude now. It's not. It used to be an extremist thing. It used to be a kind of radical left idea, but it really took control of the universities and became embedded in the university system. And it's, you know, the end result, the consequences of that is you get radical left students who think that capitalism is inherently evil, and that communism has never been tried properly and is a good system, and that, for example, that they should support Hamas terrorists and Palestinian terrorist organizations because they're engaged in a anti-colonial struggle against Israel. So lots of the kind of craziest ideas we now find widespread in our society are ones that are cultural Marxist ideas, which is what I talk about in my first book. In my second book, I talk about someone who's sort of both a progressive and a corporate figure of exploitation, which is Bill Gates. So in my second book, I devoted it to one individual figure, rather than these kind of long historical processes that put us where we are. And the third book is about globalism. So, you know, globalism is this idea that all the problems that exist in the world need global solutions. So it's anti-nation state, it's anti-sovereignty, it's saying that transnational bodies are the best solution to any problem that exists, because we're in this interconnected world that's globally linked. That's what globalism is. It says, look, the world's connected, we're all linked together. What happens in one country affects other countries. Therefore, all the solutions have to be in transnational bodies. They have to be in the UN. They have to be in the EU. They have to be in the WEF. That's what globalism is. But there's a strong link between globalist ideas and cultural Marxist ideas that I described in my first book, because cultural Marxism is essentially the understanding of history that globalists will have, because many of the people who are globalists are also cultural Marxists. So the two things are linked together. So there's a continuity between those three books.
So brilliant. And looking at your latest book, well, all of them are so incredibly relevant, especially when you've got that undergirding of cultural Marxism. You lead into Bill Gates, as you've said, this sort of liberal progressive, but actually one big capitalist and an exploitator of that, and maybe a man that's never invented anything new in his life. He just takes other people's licenses and then produces things. But that's another subject to
well,
really
I would say that there is a danger there, because, you know, I'm not like, say, for example, progressives and radical leftists who hate Elon Musk and then tell us that Elon Musk is not an intelligent person and is not a genius and wasn't responsible for the technology that Tesla, for example, or SpaceX produces. I think that line of reasoning is wrong. You know, people can be evil and intelligent, and you can politically differ from them and they're still intelligent. You know, so I'd say that Bill Gates could code, for example, and he could code very rapidly. You know, he knows what he's doing with the technology that first made him money. But the way he kind of exploits political systems and the way he wants to make his money, and the politics he then goes on to support, is all radically harmful to ordinary people, in my opinion. So you can acknowledge one thing, that this person is intelligent, while still opposing them politically. So, you know, that's the kind of correction I'd make there.
No, not at all. And I suppose the big thing is what they actually, as you were alluding to, you're saying, is what they actually then do with that intelligence, isn't it? And the
Yes,
fact
exactly.
that
Yeah,
is
that's
that for us, yeah, we're not very happy with some of that.
yeah, exactly. And whether it's beneficial to ordinary people living in the nations where these individuals have huge impact. And my argument in the Gates book is if you look at COVID, if you look at the measures that were taken and the measures that Bill Gates was primarily responsible for and supporting, because behind the scenes, really, Gates was the most influential figure determining what the World Health Organization was telling national governments. And he boasts in his own book about the fact that he took over the global response
Yeah,
to the pandemic. Now, in that book, I go over all the reasons why that was a very bad thing and why all the measures that were taken were hideous and authoritarian. Because it's usually the case with cultural Marxists, with globalists, and with the kind of most exploitative corporate figures that are backing these ideas, that their solution to the problems that they've often helped create themselves is to give them more money and power, and to take that
yeah,
money and power away from the control of ordinary people and to rest it in their hands. And and it's always the way that their solution to a problem that they've identified is to give them more money and power. So that's the essential problem with it. And I think what we're seeing is a process of elites essentially deciding that everything that they think is correct and everything that ordinary people think is wrong. And therefore, if you make a decision that they don't agree with, they will reverse it. If you support a political leader that they don't agree with, then funnily enough, that political leader will suddenly be embroiled in legal challenges and lawfare and all the other tactics we've seen, which are essentially about an elite class with unpopular views removing more popular people from representation and from political influence. Um, and that's really where we get to the third book, because what we've seen is that under a kind of established set of ideas, which include cultural Marxism, which are all globalist in nature, and which say that the power of individual nations and individual governments should be reduced, and that the power of globalist institutions should be increased. Under that, we have seen a whole set of policies that end up making ordinary people's lives more difficult. In response to that, ordinary people tend to move towards populism and to supporting populist political figures. And we then see the next step, the next reaction of globalist leadership, which is to ban and outlaw and censor. And so that's why we're seeing this kind of wave of censorship. They've made themselves very unpopular with the policies they've endorsed, because essentially those policies are always stealing money from us,
yeah,
acquiring money and power for themselves, and actually reducing our own life experiences and life opportunities. And there's not a single globalist nation leadership or nation that you could name where you would say life has improved for ordinary people. So that's why ordinary people then go to populist alternatives. And then we see the globalists trying to outlaw and ban those alternatives. And, we've seen it with Romania was denied an election.
yeah,
And we were told you can't have the leadership you want. And the transnational body, in that case, the EU, was saying, no, it's all well and good. This is a wonderful thing protecting democracy, that we deny Romanian people their election and the leader that was most popular.
mm, mm,
Um, so they give excuses for it, and whether it's saving the planet or whether it's defending democracy, as they put it, they're taking measures that are actually anti-democratic, and they're trying to ensure that power stays with them regardless of whether they're popular with you. And so the third book is about, well, what can you do as a powerless individual? You're watching this happen. The leaders that you want tend to be removed from power. We've just seen Marie Le Pen in France. Another example of it, that 12 points ahead in the polling, the most popular political party in France. They've been excluded previously, where they won the majority of the vote, by an alliance of other parties, which is another thing that happens frequently. That's happened to National Rally in France. It happens to the AfD in Germany. But when those measures keep failing and the populist party keeps getting more popular, they will then move to banning and outlawing them. And that's what we've seen with, Marie Le Pen being told you've got a 4-year sentence and you've got a 5-year sentence where you can't run for office. If somebody comes forward with a populist idea, they will then move to lawfare now to stop them, because we're only allowed to have globalist solutions and globalist policies, apparently. And that's what they call democracy. And clearly it isn't democracy, because lots of us want something else. So the third book is, look, this is happening. As an ordinary person, you're not a political leader yourself. So what do you do about it? How do you respond? I'm not someone, I've never stood for office. I've never been a senior figure in a political party. I'm just an ordinary guy, so the third book starts on the premise of they're doing all these crazy, insane things, which I don't agree with. I vote for people and then they ban the party that I want to vote for. So what do? I don't want to go to violence. I don't want to go to terrorism. I'm an ordinary guy. So this book is about, what are the measures I can take as an individual to try and do something better, and to try to eventually force the political leadership to enact the will of the people, because that's what it's all about. They're ignoring the will of the people on most major issues. You look at polling on borders, for example. For 40 years, ordinary people have been saying we think that immigration is at too high a level and you're doing too much of it. And in that period, they've just kept increasing it. They've had this globalist idea that we need open borders and we need to introduce lots of people from other places into your country, and we're going to do it whether you like it or not. And, so-called conservative parties have supported that, as well as, so-called left-wing parties. And the left-wing parties have ignored the fact that this, reduces wages, makes it more difficult for working class people to get good jobs, damages the working class in many ways. They've ignored that. And the right-wing parties have ignored the things that they're supposed to be care about. So, for example, mass immigration reduces patriotism, reduces a sense of shared loyalty within the nation, and increases crime and social problems like crime. And the right-wing parties who claim to care about those things ignore that too. And you see both the supposed left-wing parties like Labour in Britain, or the supposed right-wing parties like the Conservative Party in Britain, are actually united on a globalist policy, which is open borders. And they claim that they're going to do something about it, and they never do. They increase it. Even though polling shows again and again, the majority of people want something done about it. So, absolutely. You as an individual, you're not going to have very much say on this. So what do you do about that? And my book, gives a few tips and strategies for protecting yourself.
And it there's a book, I think it was released in Israel, written in Hebrew, and I can't think of the name, but it raises that whole issue. You vote right and get left-wing policies, and I think that that is a good sort of summation of what you've just brilliantly said as well, and the confusion that brings. So, without giving all the game away and the whole, we
Yeah.
reveal the end, are there, can you point us in any direction to really give people the reason for saying, no, I need to buy the rest of Daniel's book and I need to read this and study it? Could you give any tips or half a tip of what in your mind we can do?
Yeah, well, there's simple things. Some of the things I cover in this book are, for example, how you present yourself on social media, what you say, and how you stay within the bounds of a law that is now designed to catch you out and imprison you. Because one of the realizations that ordinary people have to make is that if you have anything like an ordinary view on mass immigration, an ordinary view on, for example, grooming gangs and the mass rape of, your children, effectively working class white children, the majority of the victims. So if you're a working class white person like me, it's your demographic that's been under assault more than any other. How do you present yourself to the police and the authorities? Because you can no longer trust that the police are there to be on your side, or that the police are going to behave in a just manner. And sadly, some of the tips are in the book are about how do you respond to a police force that is looking to arrest you? How do you respond to a judicial system that is basically run by globalist judges who want to imprison you for your ideas and your beliefs and your perfectly rational, perfectly reasonable, I think still majority ideas, but these people want you in prison for them. And so it's saying, look, there's things you can avoid that make it harder for them to go after you. So, for example, I've never been in trouble with the police myself. I hope that continues. I don't know it will continue because I'm trying to tell the truth, and they have arrested people purely for telling the truth. But you can frame your language in such a way that it's harder for them to go after you. So on social media, for instance, I tend to avoid commenting on threads where I know there will be a lot of leftist people looking to try and get me banned and trying to get me reported to the police. There's no point going on those threads because you're not going to be persuading anyone. You're not going to be changing their minds, and they will be looking to try and get you arrested. So I don't directly comment that often on left-wing sites and left-wing sources and radical progressive ones and globalist ones. There's very little point in doing that. You're not going to persuade any of them, and they're going to be looking to try and report you to the police and get you arrested. But as well as kind of avoiding that contact, there's also I avoid metaphorical language that can be taken as literal language. So one of the things they do quite often is, in a personal argument, you might have said for years, and you could say this, perfectly, and everyone around you, because they're not malign, knows that you don't mean this as a serious comment. But you could say, "Oh, I could kill them." You cannot say that metaphorically in an argument with people now, because it will be taken by the powers that be literally, and they will use it against you, even though the context makes it very clear that you did not mean that literally. And those are kind of simple measures immediately that people can take to protect themselves. Avoid metaphorical language that they can take literally, and avoid getting engaged in argument on places that you don't control the terrain. So you don't control what's being said there, and that there are people who are going to be there who are looking to report you and to get you into trouble. Really, in a free country, none of this kind of level of caution should be necessary in a free country and a just country. But sadly, it is necessary now. If you look at the kind of cases that have been resulting in people turning up, the police on doorsteps. In the UK, one of the ones that's attracted a lot of attention recently is Mark Allen and Rosalind Levine, who were the couple who got into an argument on a private limited WhatsApp group. They were discussing their school, their daughter's school, and disagreeing with the recruitment policies of that school. Now, it turns out that Mark Allen is actually I think he's a former counsellor. He's quite an articulate guy. He was the wrong sort of guy for the police to go after in this instance, because he's not like me or you. He's not someone who said things that they regard as populist. He's not even a populist figure. He's just an ordinary guy who got into an argument with his local school, and he's quite an articulate guy as well who could defend himself. So they sent 6 police officers heavy-handed to his school to arrest him over someone else saying they were offended by what he had put in and his partner had put in a private WhatsApp group. And the actual content, the actual comment was, there was nothing there, but they still sent 6 police round because the school, the authority, the local authority, was offended by what was being said. And that's where we are in Britain at the moment. We're at a place where, the same police forces that ignored grooming gangs and covered up grooming gangs and did nothing about children being raped will send someone round to your doorstep if you get into an argument with your local school, and you post private comments about the recruitment policy of your private school, and kind of very trivial comments that weren't inciting violence, weren't doing anything radical, but were simply expressing that you were upset and fed up with how a local school was dealing with an issue.
Absolutely, and just I'm just going to grab something here. I think the other interesting thing about that is the fact that the wife was a didn't she work for Times Radio, and then suddenly
I believe the husband works for Times Radio,
right.
So these are not kind of we're not talking about Tommy Robinson here, and we're not talking about you or I. We're not talking about people who have kind of set out to make political comment that is against globalist ideas or against the mainstream establishment viewpoint. We're talking about a fairly ordinary, even probably in their voting leftist couple who are kind of basically middle class, respectable people who just got into a minor dispute with their local school, and they are having the police come heavy-handed on their doorstep. We had there's another one that was from the last few days as well about a woman who had the police turn up because she was picking mushrooms, and we had and what this is about is about a narco tyranny, and again that's one of those things that globalists would say is a kind of far right idea, and so what is a narco tyranny? A narco tyranny is living in a system that comes down heavily and tyrannically on some people, where it allows total license and freedom to do whatever they want to other people. So you'll have protected groups that seem to be able to get away with anything, and they might be ethnic minority groups, they might be religious groups like Muslims, or they might be foreign immigrant groups. They are coddled and protected in this system, But the same system is reducing the freedom of speech of, the native white populace of the UK, for example, or of the US, or of, Germany or France, and really coming down like a ton of bricks whenever they protest or whenever they dissent. So at the same time, you've got these two opposite things running. And that's where you get to court cases, for example, where everyone can see, wait a minute, the same judge that's locked up that person for hurty words online and has, put someone in prison for 15 months for expressing an opinion about mass immigration, for example, that same judge a year before, released someone who had child pornography on their computer, or released someone who, had actually raped and harmed children, or refused to take that case forward. The same legal system is doing the two things at the same time, and quite often the same judges are making the same two kind of contradictory verdicts and judgments. They're being really soft on one group of people and really hard on another group of people. And, what we get is tyrannical policing of our thoughts and ideas. And what they get, apparently, is license to be as criminal as they like. And that's an anarcho-tyranny. And that's what we're actually living in. We're seeing it again and again and again come up in cases. You can't tell me that a grandfather who holds up a sign saying the police are corrupt then gets put in prison. He's not committed any violence. He's not engaged in any assaults. He's not done any property damage. That grandfather gets put inside and he gets, I think it was 15 months he was sentenced to, or 22 months, something like that. And after a few months of that treatment, he kills himself. That happens in the same country where we've got judges saying, well, you've got this child porn on your computer, or you approach that child in a near a school and you were being sexually suggestive with that child, but you come from a different culture that doesn't understand our rules, so we're going to release you. We've got those two things happening simultaneously in our country, and it's not me exaggerating. If people wanted me to go away and pull up the specific cases, I can do so. And I'm sure you've mentioned them before as well, Mark. We have seen these cases. It is happening, and we are living in anarcho-tyranny, and that's what happens under globalism, because essentially globalism tells the people who believe in it that innate characteristics define whether someone is a threat or not their actions. So you and I might say, well, surely we should want to get all child rapists off the streets, and surely we should want to get anybody who's behaving in these particular manners, we should define all of them as a threat, surely. And isn't somebody saying that the government is corrupt less of a threat than somebody trying to groom and rape children? That's the common sense approach. But that common sense approach is not a cultural Marxist one, and it's not a globalist one, because the globalist one would say what we need to defend is the idea that the vast majority of people that are coming into the country are safe and decent and contribute to our society, and we should respect and love them. So they're more concerned about protecting that than they are about protecting children. And that's what allows them in their heads to morally justify to themselves being more concerned about putting someone who talks about grooming gangs into prison than putting the grooming gang members into prison. Because they genuinely see that the threats are classified by identity, and the identity that they're worried about is not anyone's incoming identity. It's people who are white, people who are male, people who are working class, people who are conservative, people who are patriots, they're all lumped in as the far right, and they're the real threat that globalists want us to deal with and be concerned about. And once you do that, you're essentially turning against 80% of your population, because we're still talking about the working class of the biggest section of your community. Most of us aren't very wealthy and aren't, in these kind of university educated elitist groups where they are protected and they're in a bubble of wealth and they never see the worst effects of the policies they support. Most of us aren't in that category. Most of us are outside that, and the majority of our population as well in nations like Britain or France are also going to be white, and they're going to be people who would consider it normal for their government to protect them from outside threats rather than be on the side of outside threats. And it's a very bizarre situation now where our kind of upper middle class and the people who have the power in our society essentially hate the majority of their own people, and they rule on that basis. That's why judges can rule with these absurd contradictory rulings, because at university and in their social circles they've been taught that someone like me is a threat, whereas someone coming in illegally on a boat isn't a threat. And they genuinely believe it. It's not insincere what they're doing. They sincerely see a kind of ordinary working class person who likes Tommy Robinson, for example, as far more of a social threat than a million people a year coming in and you don't know what their attitudes are or where they come from or how they will behave.
And what, Daniel, thank you. Brilliant. Because what is then absolutely interesting, and we're in the sort of coming up last 20 minutes. I want your observations from our election from the 4th of July last year. But the fact that when you're talking about people that traditionally, politically, within a certain political class, if we then take the Labour Party and the clue is in the name, is the fact they are walking away from that group of people that we've always thought they're supposed to represent. The fact that we have then got one of our well-known subjects, we've got the Fabian Society in the background. Let's have a coup. Let's change things without having violence on the streets. And we're marrying all this up. Sounds a bit of a stupid question, but Daniel, what has been, and you've been brilliantly describing it, what has been your reaction? We then have this election on the 4th of July. We have 38.9%, 39.8% of people not voting. Could you briefly explain why you people didn't vote, and just give us a rough overview of the acceleration that we have seen in this tyranny? Where are we going? Where do they want to take it?
Well, I mean, a large part of this is the situation we're in at the moment, where a very, very extremist and radical Labour government, who essentially are composed of people who have these cultural Marxist ideas and have these globalist ideas and therefore hate the majority of their own people, that can only get in if at the same time the people who are supposed to be conservative have betrayed you as well. And so that was the problem. We had 14 years of conservative rule where they didn't challenge any radical leftist ideas in education, in entertainment, and ideas that you might call woke as well. They didn't fight back against any of it. In fact, they endorsed it themselves. And under David Cameron, they got the idea that because Tony Blair had been successful, they had to be more like Tony Blair. And they got that idea just at the point where people were seeing through New Labour and seeing through Tony Blair and seeing that actually a lot of that was incredibly dangerous and damaging and false. So, the Conservatives, rather brilliantly, the Conservative strategists adopted the radical left portions, especially on immigration, that the left wing parties were pushing as well. And that when you get to the scale of immigration where it's 1 million people a year, there's no way that you can control who those people are, because you're letting in 1 million of them every year, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And it goes back to really World War II, where since World War II, nobody in the general public, as it existed then or as it exists now, even, this is the funny thing, even from immigrant groups themselves, no majority in the general public has ever said open borders and mass immigration and letting anyone in is a good idea. Nobody. But all the main political parties have done it. And from Tony Blair onwards, we saw a massive increase of it. But from the Second World War onwards, we were told your native population needs to be replaced. You don't have enough workers. And now they say it's because we have an aging population. Then they said it was because of the deaths in World War II. But of course, that excuse has run out long ago. Now it's because we have an aging population. We have to have these insane levels of immigration. But even immigrant communities that have integrated and have settled, the ones that have integrated also don't want mass immigration now. So you still have a majority of people saying these levels of immigration are insane, but you don't have any party supporting that. And globalism says, no, you're not allowed that opinion. So increasingly they make that opinion, I don't want mass immigration, illegal, and they censor it and they remove it. And they force even parties that say they want change to go along with the globalist line. So, with reform and the recent, internal disputes in reform, what you see there is you see one guy, Rupert Lowe, comes forward and he says, look, the only way you're going to deal and deliver to what majority of people want, the only way you're going to deal with rising crime and with failing infrastructure and with the levels of harm that have been introduced to your society is you've got to deport the people who have come in and are criminal, are behaving in criminal ways. So if they're raping kids, if they're, engaged in the black market economy, if they're, committing crimes, you've got to deport them. And you've got to do that with not just the people who have arrived yesterday, but maybe the people who arrived 5 years ago or the people who arrived 10 years ago. And Rupert Lowe is honest about that. And he says that the only way you're going to solve it is to remove those people. And you've got to have deportations to remove those people. Whereas Nigel Farage basically says, and this is supposedly our kind of saviour and our hope for an alternative to the mainstream globalist consensus. Nigel Farage says, you can't be honest on those things. It's impossible to do. Nobody's going to get voted in if you say that's what's needed. So I'm going to concoct this, bullying claim. We're going to run with this ridiculous story that Rupert Lowe was bullying people and kick him out of the party because with him we can't get elected. And so even your parties of resistance will be buckling down to the globalist line, which only increases the frustration of ordinary people and only increases the social pressures you're getting. And then you get people like leading civil war experts saying you're building the conditions for a civil war in the UK within 5 years. I personally think that's less likely, because I think you can boil the frog and normalcy bias, so you can just incrementally make people's lives worse all the time. And if each stage is just a small increment, they'll let you keep doing it until they're boiled alive. I think that's a powerful psychological factor. And there's also this normalcy bias, which is that, we can still do some ordinary things. And yes, I might see more crime on my streets, but I can still take my kids to a play park and have a normal day with them, you know. And I might now be in a weird situation where something I say online could get me arrested when it's fairly standard and an opinion held by millions of other people. But if I don't say that thing, I can still live a fairly normal life, you know. So we have this normalcy bias as well, which prevents us from rising up in kind of revolutionary anger about all this stuff. But we do have, at the same time, we've got Civil War experts saying, academics that are teaching at our universities, who are supposedly experts on these things, saying, actually, we've got all the conditions of a civil war building here, because the globalist political elite is so removed from what ordinary people want and what ordinary people are experiencing. And that's a very, very dangerous situation for us to be in. But we are getting there. And, you know, one of the things that I think is important about my book and my writing is that I'll be honest about all of this stuff. And, you know, a lot of mainstream people, a lot of people who, even someone like Douglas Murray, who's good on certain kinds of madness that we see in our society now, aren't fully honest about, well, what you'd have to do in response, because they see that when you are fully honest about what you'd have to do in response, both about yourself as an individual, which is what my book covers, and about what a political party would have to do to solve any of this, like Rupert Lowe is saying, you get excluded and denied and removed from society, and you get told that you're far right. You know, well, I've never believed in political violence. You know, I've spent the last 15 years really online arguing against anti-Semitism, and I'm very pro-Israel, and I detest supporting Hamas. But you know, what I will get if I become more prominent and more known, what I will get, I can guarantee you, is that because I've talked about populism, because I've talked about opposing radical left ideas, someone will come along and try and say that I'm anti-Semitic at some point, you know. And you know, I've loads and loads of people know me online where I've had people attacking me as a fake nationalist because I'm very, very protective of Jewish people. So, but I will get that because it's a standard label that gets put on people that they want to silence now.
But the standard, and just to say, sorry to interrupt, and the standard label is when you say, you're far right, and then we'll say, well, you're far left because you moved so far to the left. But when people then say right wing, and you say to them, could you define right wing? They can't. And then if they're saying, well, my politics are right wing because I believe in small government, I believe in running a business, independent. I want small government. I want those freedoms to decide what I want to buy, where I want to go, and all the rest. And I want the best for my country. Daniel, in the last this has just been brilliant, and thank you. It's great. In the last 5-6 minutes, could you give a brief overview of the state of our economy? The whole green issue scam that's going on, and how many times you and I are like finding a wall and bashing our head against a wall about the stupidity of the decisions that this government are making that call themselves people running the UK.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that transfers power to transnational bodies is this idea that we're facing a global climate crisis, you know. And I think for some of them, it's genuinely manipulative and essentially a wealth transfer, as it was with people like Bill Gates for, you face a global pandemic, you need these responses. Oh, it's purely coincidental that these responses transfer $4 trillion to us. You know, the biggest growth of billionaires we've had in recent decades was during COVID. Lots and lots of people became billionaires off this, and lots and lots of people made a lot of money, but the economy as a whole was damaged. And it was the worst in the British economy. Rishi Sunak, then Chancellor, had to stand up and say, we've done the worst economic damage for 350 years. Right? But a small number of people got very, very enriched by it. You know, most of us got impoverished by it. A small number of people got very, very enriched. And it's the same with the climate change agenda and the net zero agenda. You know, whether you believe in climate change or not, you know, is the temperature increasing? Well, indicators probably are that it is. But we also have indicators.
It all depends where you measure them. If you're going to measure them next door
it
to
depends where you
a runway and planes
and
taking
yeah,
off.
and the measuring has been manipulated. So, for example, they changed where they cited some of the measuring.
Yeah.
You know, and little changes affect that data, and they're effectively using junk data to make computer models. And most of the argument for climate change is on computer modeling. We saw again, you know, you can compare it with COVID again. We saw that computer modeling was used for these extreme reactions and to justify these extreme reactions. Well, computer modeling isn't an exact science, you know, and they pretend it's an exact science, and it isn't. You know, it's a statistical device which can be manipulated if you feed junk data in. Feed junk data in, you get junk data out. You know, and then they also manipulate it by taking the most extreme case scenarios. So the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, they generally advertise the worst case scenarios, and that's what gets picked up in the press. So you have a computer modeling task force. You say to them, model what will happen if temperature increases 1 degree. Model what will happen if temperature increases 2 degrees. You know, and they go away and the scientists do that, and they feed in, you know, the data that's already been manipulated by people who are getting paid to produce the worst possible results. And then what they get back is, you know, junk data that says disaster's coming, this complete apocalypse is coming. But then it gets even worse than that, because they've used junk data to get to that point. And then when they're at that point, they then say, well, these are the things that need to be done to solve it. So net zero is the response to climate change. And you can argue about whether the climate change is happening. You know, there's this kind of huge geological periods, and there's things like ice ages that they don't factor in to this data. But then, all right, say you believe it. Let's say you're less skeptical than me or you, and you actually believe temperature's increasing, right? And you even believe that it's man-made. Let's say that, you know, let's go, look, let's concede all of that and say you believe it's man-made, you believe it's via pollution, right? Do what they then propose to do about it. Does that make sense? Well, because what they propose and how it's working at the moment is that the biggest polluters on the planet can go ahead and carry on polluting as much as they like, India and China. And the place where virtually all of the man-made supposed effect on the climate will be coming from can carry on doing that. And they're building coal-fired power stations. They're, you know, they're pumping carbon CO2 into the atmosphere, much, much more than we are. And the nation that's responsible for less than 1% of global emissions should take on the burden of all the measures designed to supposedly solve this. You know, so you're saying to British people, 99% of the problem will carry on and we'll ignore it. Well, 1% of the problem is going to solve it. That's what the kind of net zero policies forced on Britain is saying. And it's clearly nonsensical, even by its own terms. Even if you accept, I believe you that there's man-made climate change. I believe that the measures you're saying will solve it. It doesn't make any sense because of the people you're asking to do it. You know, you're not asking India and China to do it. They are not enforcing net zero in India and China. They're just not doing it, but we are. And you're saying to ordinary people that, you know, it's very like the situation where everyone can instantly see that it's mad. And one of the ways people can instantly see it's mad is that the people demanding this are flying around in jets, and they have private jets.
Absolutely.
You know, and they're saying to people, we're going to put controls on your family car that emits a tiny, tiny fraction in a year of what we produce in one flight, but we're going to put all the burden of solving it on you and your family car or your 2-week holiday. Well, we fly around in jets still.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing on a national scale. We're saying this country that is responsible for a tiny fraction of it will take on all the burden of solving it, while these huge developing countries and already developed countries that are not doing any of these measures, they get to carry on doing it. Yeah. And even more insanely, we do things like, you know, Ed Miliband and the new Labour government, we do things like import energy from abroad, claiming that's green, so that we can close down and not use our own energy resources that we've got that would be a lot cheaper for us, you know. So we can't have coal-fired power stations, but not even that. We can't have oil development in the UK. You know, we've got these vast oil reserves worth hundreds of billions of pounds. We could power ourselves independently, energy-wise, for the next 500 years.
Daniel, I do apologise to
we're importing energy right from these countries that aren't being green.
No, I couldn't agree more. And Daniel, I do apologise because we're coming right against the hour.
Yeah, no,
but no, absolutely right. It's complete and utter madness is how I view this. If not, I would even use the word evil. And that's how I view it. Daniel, I cannot thank you enough for your time. Thank you for sitting down with me. And I just urge people to go and find Daniel's books, get hold of his Substack, get in touch with him. I'm honoured to be able to sit down and have this conversation with you, Daniel, because your voice is very important. And I'd also say this to you, that the way you write at various times makes me absolutely chuckle, if not laugh out loud. But that, which is also a really good thing. Daniel, I'm going to play us out. Please stay there, and I'll say goodbye.
Can I just say one thing before we go? Just one final thing. That's why the title of the book, you know, F the Planet. It's about protecting your world rather than their insane ideas about how we protect the planet. So that's why, you know, that title is relevant.
Thank you. All right, mate. Stay there. Thank you so much indeed. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.